Welcome to Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. I'm Wendy Conquest, and I'm here with Tim Stein, Dan Drake, and Jeannie Vitoni. Today's conversation, so let me just start by saying, as clinicians, we all have degrees, we have licenses, we have certifications, and so we look pretty good, usually. And we from time to time or often seek peer supervision. I don't know if our audience members know that. And so today we wanted to invite you in to a window as to a bit of how that looks. And so one of the pieces as sex addiction therapist is, are we on point with holding addicts responsible? Are we on point with creating empathy for the partners if the addict is complaining about the partner? Are we on point with being able to see and ferret out when the addict is lying or minimalizing or justifying? So that's the conversation that we are going to have today, and that we're excited to have you be a part of. So where do we start with this? I guess, can we start with, how do you feel about working with sex addicts? What is that like for each of you? And I'll include myself. And what is that like? It's a sub specialty, right? You could be working with general population of depression or anxiety, but all of us work with sex addiction. What's that like?
I love working with sex addicts. I will couch that by saying, because the work is about helping people change their life, create hope, and heal their trauma. If this work was all about digging into the sexual dysfunction and the relational dysfunction and living there, I would have burned out years ago. But I love this work, not because of the pain of where people have been and the pain of what they're having to deal with, but I love doing this work because of the journey out of that. And that's really the work that we get to step in, is helping people find their way out. I find that, I mean, it resonates with me in my own personal journey, and I find it very meaningful and hopeful work as a professional.
I will say for me, I mean, actually, I don't know if you can see this behind me, but there's a banyan tree, and I chose Southern California does not have banyan trees, but I chose banyan tree for our kind of image, because part of that tree, that the root structures, all the things that are typically underground, part of it becomes above ground with the banyan tree. And I just love, to me, what I love about working with sex addiction particularly is these shameful, secretive, dark places, these places of pain and, real serious problems and difficulties for people that have created damage for themselves and relationships. They trust us. They trust me to share this, and that I get to be a witness and a part in helping them heal and restore these, dark places in their life, and help integrate them and kind of bring these things to the light and help heal and restore relationships. I think it's such an honor. I took that for granted early, I'll say, in my work, that people come trust me and just share their stuff. Like, that's what I'm a therapist. That's my job. But, people have failed most of our clients in the past. There's been trauma or abuse. And for me, that the fact that people can trust me to walk alongside them as they heal and restore is such a gift for me, to be let into someone's life to help them heal. So that's what I love about it.
Thinking for myself, because I work so much with both sides, but today we're focusing on the one with the addiction. The healing that happens, the change of life that happens, the creation or restoration of self, to have someone come in such crisis, normally such crisis, and to do the hard work, and to be a witness, to be a partner on that journey, the honor that I feel in being part of that work is super fulfilling. when people ask, oh, you're in sex addiction, that might be so hard. And I was like, my clients work hard. All of my clients work really hard. This work is not for the faint of heart, and it's so incredibly rewarding to create a new life for oneself. That's so, for me, it's also inspirational. So that's why I do this work, and for the coupleship too. Again, because I work with both sides of the relationship. It's powerful. It's powerful stuff.
Dan, I'm grateful that you referred to the banyan tree. So so my logo is a peacock feather, and peacocks basically can eat poisonous plants and frogs and insects and turn them into food. So they're one of the few animals that can take something that's really toxic and transform it. And I think that every addict on their journey, that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing is they're changing. And when they get far enough along in their recovery, they realize that everything, all the work that they did, all the nasty stuff that happened, actually gave them a greater, I don't want to say nutrient, but they gave them almost like iridescent feathers, like they're a greater human being because of what happened to them and moving through that. And I would say that so many of my clients regarding their sexuality and sexual experiences, it's been pretty awful. And so for them to, if they really choose to do that work, to have a fulfilling sexual life is really amazing to see all the different transformations on so many levels. So so working with addicts, addicts are a wily bunch, right? And so part of the addiction is covering up. The addicts don't want people to know what they're doing. They will lie, they will cheat, they will gaslight, they'll do all these different behaviors. And so I've heard a lot from partners, it's like, don't, make sure he's not gaslighting you, make sure that he's gonna manipulate you, he's gonna make you think that he's the greatest guy and that he's sober when he's not. So what do we do?
I will just say, and maybe the three of you have, some magic radar that I do not have, but I have just accepted that I can't tell if people are lying to me or not. Um, what I have found out through research and study is that I can tell if people's emotional state doesn't match sort of what we expect them to have their emotional state being. I can pick that up, but I can't tell if people are lying to me. I've had guys that I thought for sure were telling me absolutely the truth, only to find out 6 months later that they'd been lying to me about being sober for an extended period of time. There are other people that I thought for sure were fibbing and bending things, only to find out that what they were telling me was really pretty close to the truth. I have just accepted that I really can't tell if people are telling the truth or if they're lying to me. And when I let go of trying to figure that out and I work with them through their experience and their choices and the consequences and sort of laying out reality and, if you're telling me the truth, this is great. But if you're not, here's what might happen. When I lay out sort of that picture, it seems to go better. But I don't know. Can you guys tell if people are telling the truth or not? I can't.
I want to, so to answer Tim's question, no, I cannot always tell if someone's lying. And I will sometimes say that to clients, like kind of just you did, Tim, is like, if that's true, then here's this. And if that's not true, what does that mean? But I want to, in my mind, as we're listening, and I'm thinking, this is the importance of having the different kind of training. So if you're out there, listener, and sex addiction or wondering about problematic sexual behavior, is get someone who's trained in this. Because I do think when I walk in the room, and I'm guessing you all too, that's in my head. And I'm used to working with some of that. Like, are they conning me? Do I see the dynamic that's happening? Is that gaslighting? I have a better awareness of that because we're trained and experienced in this. And I can only think about therapists who, or coaches helping professionals who don't have this training. And so that manipulation, they're more vulnerable to, in my opinion. So I feel like this is a little infomercial moment.
Right. Can I just say too on that?
Yeah.
There are some things I can tell, some things I've seen and some things that feel like out of, that don't add up to me. So there are some things, but I think to your point, Tim, and I took this, this is my own stuff. I took it personally when someone would tell me later that, or I'd find out something that they were lying, like somehow personally in this sense, not that there's a slight betrayal, but it's more like I failed them. I took this on somehow. I didn't do something well enough, and almost like I failed the relationship because I didn't spot something. And I've had to get out of that because, my work isn't, I'm not a polygraph. I'm not a human polygraph. And it's also pretty insulting if somehow could magically tell everyone lying when the intimate partner, their partner who's been living with them for months, years, decades, when they couldn't tell. So yeah, there are some things I can see, but I've been lied to. I've been, manipulated. What I will say is understanding partner betrayal trauma. What I think, to your point, Jeannie, when someone gives me a skewed story, when they come in and all they're doing is complaining about the partner and my partner is this, this, and this, and this, and this is why I'm doing this, when it's all this kind of distorted, rationalizing, minimizing, kind of blame shifting stuff, that's when I have always in my head the, quote unquote, other side of the story, because I've seen non-specialists, like what you're saying, Jeannie, just, it's easy to take the bait. Oh, wow. Poor you, you're the victim. And then instead of saying, there's a context, and most likely the things that the person's telling me is not the whole story. There's usually a way bigger story, and it's generally pretty skewed and distorted. And the person's taking a victim narrative as opposed to, they leave out huge pieces of information that would be very helpful to get a more accurate picture of what's going on. So those things, I do think with training and experience, you can say the story I'm hearing from one side, especially if it's about the partner and the relationship, is almost always not the whole truth. And I usually hold that in tension. And I often find myself translating the partner's experience to the addict if they don't get it, or trying to bring the other side in. And if I don't know the other side, bringing in the partner to make sure the partner knows me and I get to know the partner to say, okay, well, this is more likely, which might be different than what we're talking about. But I think I wasn't trained to do this in school. I was trained to sit with my client, really take their, help them, like, get in their world sort of individualistically, kind of narcissistically. So in a way, but in our work, I think we have to hold, if someone's partnered, we have to hold the relationship always in mind if we're going to do effective work on the addict side.
There's another piece to what you're talking about, which is when the addict is giving that victim role and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes it's, well, what's the partner doing on their side? And sometimes, because we know the addicts have such deep trauma, sometimes it's stepping into what is their trauma lens. Because, we've all seen addicts where the partner will be kind of upset and the addict experiences them as just overwhelmingly negative, and the addict just can't tolerate that negativity, where we're looking at it saying that really wasn't much emotional at all, and she's moved on, or they've moved on. And so sometimes it's about helping the addict work through their trauma so that they can have a more realistic perspective and experience of what's going on.
So just so you're listening to Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. And today's topic is a more inward look at how the four of us as clinicians work with sex addicts. So something Dan said, and it was the relationship. And so what I've been finding is that when I'm working with an addict and they say, and I relapsed, and I watch them, I watch their body language, their facial expression, and now I've learned to go, and I think that a lot of our training is to jump in and say, okay, so you had a relapse. Okay, so what were the events that led up to it? What were the, what do we do? What's the recovery plan? What are we going to do? And what I'm finding is just sitting and letting them talk about it.
Hmm.
And so because what I'm really seeing is a lot of times they go into a shame spiral all on their own. So they certainly don't need me saying, well, how could you? Like, really, with all the work we've done, really? They don't need that from me. Is what I'm finding. And I want to hear your opinions, because I'm like, is this a good intervention? What's happening here? What I'm finding is when that happens, when they now are spiraling, when they now are edging, when they're doing middle circle behaviors, they're more apt to tell me. And that's a shift I'm seeing in the work that I'm doing. And so now afterwards, do I start saying, okay, all right, so what led up to that? Well, what was happening? What was happening 24 hours before? What was happening 2 days before? We do a postmortem on it. But at the moment that they're divulging, I'm in it with them. What do you think about that?
I was going to add one piece to there's the one side, one approach. We could just go into firefighting, fix it mode. Like, there's a problem, let's fix it, which I do think. And by the way, I'm just going to give a plug for your guys's relapse autopsy. I use Tim Stein's relapse autopsy all the time when someone has a relapse. It's very helpful, very effective. It does a real exhaustive, look into what happened, what the problem was. I do think it's very helpful.
Yeah,
I
I will
also
just
like
say that it's now the Willow Tree autopsy, and
Thank you.
we just updated it, so it's even cooler and
Well,
better.
and I'm going to get your new version because I found the old one helpful. So if it's even cooler and better, then I'll use the new one. What I think there's the flip side too. I see sometimes happen in meetings, and sometimes I even find my knee-jerk tendency is to overly like give absolution or kind of go in, and almost like encourage. You hear this from people. Well, we don't want to shame the person, so then we'll go the opposite side and almost minimize it and say, well, isn't that bad? Or, you're doing the best you can. You haven't lost all your recovery. You don't lose, we can go into sort of smoothing it over before letting the person actually sit. I know what I heard you say, Wendy, is not either way. We're not going to try and solve the problem because there's a problem. Something happened. The person relapsed. Or we're not just going to smooth it over and say it wasn't that big of a deal. We're just going to we're going to give space to talk about it and explore it.
So
Mhm.
I do similar with a little different. and it usually goes, well, tell me what happened. And so it's not necessarily the quiet, but it's tell me what happened. So I want them to share and feel safe to do that. I think this also goes back to something I was talking about in my men's group, is that balance between encouragement and challenge, of encouraging the person. There's the analysis, the problem solving analysis. I agree that needs to happen. So I would have them tell their story first. Then we go into analysis. But I'm always walking the line as an addiction therapist between encouragement, supportive, reminding them of progress, things that they've done well, or changes they're making. I also challenge them. What's the next step? What's the barrier? What got in the way? How are you going to do this differently, better next time? I certainly don't want to shame, but I also don't want to release them from the positive impact of some guilt or shame, because I'll say, how can you use that as a motivation that you never want to be back here again? What can we do? So I want to not rescue them away from that. Not that I'm saying any of you are, but I think it's important to feel some regrets. And then how do you harness that? And that keeps it from the shame going over the cliff. But I'm always walking this balance of encouragement, and confrontation. Do you guys find the same thing? This walk in delicate balance? I see Dan nodding his head.
Yeah.
I'm having an insecure moment right now where I'm sitting here and I'm hearing you guys say, when they relapse, here's what I'm doing. And I'm like, I don't know what I do. And as I'm thinking about that, I think it varies. Like if I've got an addict that's early in their program and they're trying to put stuff together and we're still in the process of teaching them, about their cycle, about their red flags, how to stay sober, how to use tools, what tools helpful for them. If they relapse, I think I tend to lean more into, wow, that really sucks, but let's talk about what was going on and how do we use this as a learning opportunity to build up your program so it's more effective. If they're further out, if they're further out and they're more solid in that kind of stuff, and they relapse, I don't think I'm often surprised because typically they've been talking about stresses, they've been talking about difficulties, they've been talking about middle circle behaviors or middle circle experiences, and they may or may not be dealing with them effectively. And so if a relapse comes up in the midst of those, it's more of a, yeah, there was all this stuff going on and that relapse, that makes sense, that sucks. And I might sit with them with how much that sucks. And then, well, what was going on that you were missing or that you weren't addressing? And I think when I'm surprised by a relapse, I think that where I find myself ending up is, how come we weren't talking about this stuff? Did this really come out of the blue?
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Um,
what's also
I-
coming to mind is something I am guessing, assuming that we all do. And the other part is, and how are you going to tell if you're in a relationship?
yeah,
And how are you going to tell your partner?
Right, right.
And what
Tim,
are you going to tell your partner? And circling back to that relational piece, I think that's we can't continue the conversation without noting that.
yeah.
Which I'm going to go back to in a second, but Wendy, I know. you have a
Yeah,
question.
yeah, that's okay. Tim, I appreciate that because it brought to my mind that I don't work with addicts early in recovery right now.
No.
So my clientele is further along. So the group that I run, they have at least 6 months to a year sobriety coming in usually. So I'm working with people that are farther along. So but it reminded me of when I did work with addicts early, and when you can't just sit with a slipper relapse early in recovery. It's like, okay, and that, and there's got to be that strategy, and that I guess that belief that both the therapist and the client are wanting sobriety. And I do remember a client that came in and he said, so, I had a relapse. And I'm like, so, okay, that's not okay. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I'm an addict. It's going to happen. I'm like, no. And he's like, wait, I've been going to 12-step meetings. They say that, I thought that it was just like part of the thing that it was possible and that it's just going to happen. And I was like, no, you can be sober. You can be sober like for a long time. And that was new to him.
Can I a nuance on that, Wendy, just for a second?
Yeah.
I was on a podcast and this question caught me off guard. The person asked me, is relapse inevitable for addicts?
Mm.
And I wasn't expecting it. And I just said, no. And to your point, no, relapse is not inevitable. Addicts do not have to relapse. What is inevitable, at least for a season, is addict brain saying, I have a solution to whatever problem is coming to you. The brain will offer relapse as an opportunity or an option. We don't have to take that. That's not the option that we have to do, but the brain can actually say that that's what I know an answer to whatever problem you've got right now. So I think that's the distinction. We don't have to settle for relapse being, inevitable for our clients. So that's just a nuance I like to distinguish.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And there are clinicians that sex addiction clinicians that say, oh no, relapse will happen. And it's like, oh man, that's
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good thing to say.
Because then we sort of put in place, it's okay, as opposed to, I expect more from my clients. Not, that I'm not expecting perfection, but I think when we open the door, then I think I want to hold my clients to a higher standard, that they can do this, and I believe that they can do it. It's not easy, it's difficult. Well, the program is very simple and yet very difficult, right?
Yes.
So it's all that. So, and that's why I was going to go circle back for a second to Jeannie, what you said. I had a hard time earlier with this, but the last thing, you know, I've learned this the hard way. I have to have the uncomfortable conversation, especially if I'm working with couples. What is a relapse plan? If relapse were to happen, what's our plan? How does the partner want to hear this information? What's the plan in place? And nobody wants to have that conversation because it assumes, well, relapse is not going to happen. When I do that conversation, it's not that I'm saying relapse is inevitable. It's like, you know, being in Southern California, I have stuff. I have an earthquake bag. I've got stuff. I've got, you know, supplies that needed in case of an earthquake. I hope I never have to use that. I hope I never have to use it. But in the case of a disaster, I have this prepared just in case. So that's the way I see this. It's not condoning anything, but I do think it's really helpful to have these plans in place. That way we don't have to guess. Because I don't know if we all agree. I think I'm not in the business of holding secrets from partners. If, you know, if the partner thinks this person's in active sobriety and recovery and the client tells me they've relapsed, but they're not willing to tell the partner, that's not something that I want to sign up for personally. I feel like I'm actively contributing to a lie or a con.
Right. We have this conversation a lot, this what we call proactive relapse planning. And not because relapse will happen, but it can happen. We're going for the no, we're going for zero, but it could happen. And so, you know, we teach a lot about, for the partner as well as the addict, is what is the preparation plan should that occur? And Dan, I've spoken of this at some different conferences, and I use the wildfires because, you know, I am in a fire zone. I have been out of my house multiple times because of fire, and it's a possibility. So like you said, with the go bag, it's having the conversation, and hopefully you never need to enact it. I know Tim and I, in our disclosures, one thing we do on the second day of our disclosure is a relapse plan. It's a relapse agreement. If there's a relapse, what's going to happen? Who's going to be told? How is the partner told? In what time frame? So absolutely, I'm aboard with you. And that's bringing up that uncomfortable conversation, but having a thorough preparation for both parts of the partnership. So I'm with you 1,000%.
Yeah. Hey, can we circle back a little bit to where we were starting? And I'm curious, what type of relationship, and I assume it probably varies, but what type of relationship do you find most effective in working with the addicts? The hard ass, hard line, this is what you do. If you're not following my program, I'm done with you.
Yeah, that's me.
You know, the buddy, hey man, yeah, I know it's tough, and let's work on this, and it's yeah. Or what type of therapeutic relationship do you find yourself stepping into when you're working with the addict, and what do you find most effective?
For me, can I just say, like, there's not a default. I think it depends on the client. So my general disposition, I'm not a hard ass type of guy. That's just not my approach. So, and I remember first entering this field and, you know, seeing people work and in groups or other people that I admired, you know, ahead of me in the journey. And I'm like, okay, well, they're just different personalities than me. They show up differently. So what I think I've done, I was able to learn some of the ways that they approach things and kind of incorporate that within my own style. So I don't take a buddy approach, but I don't take a hard ass approach either. I think I generally tend to align with a client, help them feel safe, but not comfortable. Like I'm invested in safety, but not necessarily comfort, because I think none of us grow in comfort. So I'm trying to do some version of that. That said, if I get someone who's more, you know, let's say malignant, narcissist, aggressive, that they don't seem to care about the impact on their partner, I'm probably going to come a lot harder on things. If they're actively abusing and harming and they don't seem to care or kind of get it, I don't sit back and just sort of, you know, tell me more about that. I'm not okay with that, because I see the damage happening.
Yeah.
So I guess it also depends on how someone's showing up. Is I might show up a little differently based on how they're presenting. I don't know about you guys.
I'm thinking of that, and what's coming to mind is back to what I said earlier, that delicate balance between encouragement and confrontation. And so I think I do vary a bit depending on who the client is and what their needs are, but not so much because those two core values are always running for me. Um, I would say I think my clients trust me to call them to the mat. And I feel like that's a very special, important holding, that they trust me to call attention to something if I see something concerning. But also I want to be their encouragement. I want to support them. This work is hard. This work is hard, and you've got to have some cheerleaders, and it's not the betrayed partner. We don't want to put that on the betrayed partner. So I feel like there's this balance. So that's how I work, is that balance of, I am a hard ass at times. I absolutely am. And I told someone last night, put your seatbelt on. And I had a client say that to me once, Jeannie, hold on, let me put my seatbelt on. And I was like, that's a good metaphor. And also, I want to celebrate with you when something's going well and you've made some positive change. And when I see positive, I'll point it out. So I feel like I do both pretty consistently. That's my way. What about you guys, Wendy?
So, so I work with women addicts and male addicts, right? So, with women, it is, I find that I need to be more careful and and be very, very attuned to them. Women addicts seem to have many more dimensions than male addicts do. And in some ways they're more complicated. So I'll just say that for the women. For the men, it's complicated. So one of the very first things that I say, so sometimes both the wife and the addict are on the phone or on the Zoom call, on the initial call. And if it's the addict, I say, hey, right at the beginning, I say, hey, if your partner wants to meet me, because a lot of the acting out has been with women or watching pornography with women, my being a woman just unconsciously can cause some ripples. So, so I just say, hey, if they want to meet me, get a sense about me, I'm completely open to that. If that's going to have them feel more confident with you and I working together. And I've been told that I'm kind, yet extremely direct. So kind of no bullshit. And so the men really like that. I think for the most part, I could see some of my clients shaking their heads, but, I think that, what's important is, experience and intelligence. I think that sex addicts want to know, do you know what you're talking about? Do you understand this? Do you get this? And so I think that that's probably the most important factor. And that's for both men and women, I'm going to say. And I'll kind of end with that one. That's a great question though, Tim.